Morton.E.Converse, the pioneer of toy manufacturing in Toy Town, is a name that was heard around the world, and it is still a household name 100 years later. Did you ever ask what is Morton.E.Converse's middle name? I did, and that's what took me down the road on a magical history tour. Morton.E.Converse was born in 1837 to Ebenezer H. Converse and Sarah Darling Converse. Yes, the irony of his father's name was that it was Ebenezer, as in Ebenezer Scrooge. Little did his impressive list of ancestors know that one day Morton Ebenezer would become one of the most popular toy makers in the world. Morton Ebenezer Converse comes from a long line of distinguished family heritage dating back to some of the first settlements in Massachusetts. At the time of Morton.E.Converse's life, he could trace his heritage back to Charlestown, Mass. In the early 1630s. But modern genealogy methods not available to Converse at the time now trace his family back to Roger de Coignier of France, who was born in the year 1010, granted the constableship of Durham, England by the bishop, after he emigrated to England with William the Conqueror. The Converse name evolved over the centuries. First, Converse was spelt with no E with the arrival of Edward Converse from England, who settled in Charlestown in 1630, where he was deacon and selectman and founder of the first church. Converse was head of the commission that explored and settled the area now known as Woburn. The Edward Converse family made up almost half of the 13 inhabitants of the town. Edward's son, Lieutenant James Converse, was an officer in King Philip's War. In 1692, his son, Major James Converse, was commander at the Storers Garrison at Wells, Maine during King William's War, where he was credited for successfully warding off the attackers. For his service, the major's heirs were granted land in Ashburnham, Massachusetts. In the early 1700s, the major's grandson, Joshua Converse, was constable and selectman of the area called Dunstable, New Hampshire, which was divided into several towns including Nashua and Merrimack, where Joshua drowned in the river. Soon after his death, his son, Zebulon Converse, was born. In the early 1770s, Zebulon moved to the first lot in the first range of Rindge, New Hampshire. Zebulon's son, who he named Joshua after his father, was born in Rindge. He became a manufacturer of woodenware, starting the mills at Converseville in 1845. Joshua was responsible for town improvements and reservoirs, often paying for them out of his own pocket, naming one of his children George Washington, another Christopher Columbus, and yet another Ebenezer. In 1835, Ebenezer married Sarah Darling, daughter of Jewett Boynton and Hannah Murdoch Darling of Winchendon. Their eldest son obtained his father's name as his middle name, which brings us to Morton Ebenezer Converse. As a brave young man, Morton enlisted in his father's Company K of the 6th New Hampshire Infantry during the Civil War. His great-uncle Nelson Converse was colonel of the entire regiment. When Morton enlisted in the Rindge Company, it was in response to President Lincoln's call for 3-year volunteers. Company K took part in General Burnside's expedition in North Carolina during the Civil War. In 1862, his regiment joined the Army in Virginia for several battles, including the Battle of Bull Run. However, Morton's service put a toll on his health and was unable to work for 2 years afterwards. But he eventually went to work at Converseville, where he manufactured products of wood acid. The woodenware shop in Converseville, which was started by his grandfather Joshua in 1845, was successful in manufacturing many products, including the wooden clothespin. In 1873, he refitted one of the mills to manufacture woodenware, where he developed his first toys. Inspired one day when he made a product that cheered up his daughter when she was sick by converting the collar boxes the factory made into an imaginary toy. But Converse couldn't get the permits he needed to build a toy factory in Rindge. So he moved to Winchendon to team up to make toys with Orlando Mason in Waterville to form Mason.E.Converse. In 1883, Mason withdrew from the partnership and went on to develop another line of toys in Winchendon. The Converse Toy and Woodenware Company then operated in the Monadnock Mill, known as Winchendon Furniture Company, on Murdoch Avenue. That was when he partnered with his uncle, Alfred Converse, and a few years later the company changed its name to Morton.E.Converse and Company. The Jackson Avenue site is the familiar area. By 1903, their factories employed over 300 people in Winchendon. The company prospered with creative and talented toy makers. They produced numerous products and never seemed to run out of ideas, like Noah's Ark, wagons, 10-pins, and farmhouses. And took the game of cornhole and beanbags to a new level, a sensational game with a new, catchy name. They designed an army of drums with unique styles. They not only perfected the art of wooden toys, but used tin and steel to create mechanical toys. Converse worked diligently with artists and painters and used a technique called lithography to add color and character to each of its toys. But some don't realize that they even made their own version of the Ouija board. The firm and other toy manufacturers in town had such a reputation that by 1915, Winchendon became known as Toy Town, U.S.A. When Morton's son Atherton joined the firm, the name was then adapted to Morton.E.Converse & Son. They won the highest awards for the finest toys in the world at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. They even had a store in New York City at 21 Park Place, run by Willard and McKee. The Toy Town complex employed 1,000 workers, was considered unsurpassed in its manufacturing of wooden horses. Of course, the toy they made that history remembers the most is the popular hobby horse, made with real horsehair and leather for the ears, stirrups, and saddle. The original Toy Town horse was designed in 1914 as a parade float. From the old railroad station on Central Street to the old tavern at the Winchendon School, in its various styles and locations, including the bank on Central Street, and later the fire station on the old Tucker School property. And finally settling in at the intersection just down the street from the home of Morton Ebenezer Converse. And Clyde, as he was nicknamed, was a symbol of Toy Town throughout the ages. There were other toy manufacturers successful in Winchendon, adding to the Toy Town name. Orlando Mason partnered with Homer Parker to form Mason and Parker. They joined with A.O. Spear Company of Gardner, later purchased by United Industrial Syndicate Incorporated. Fred Clapp, who had worked for Converse and Mason and Parker, formed the F.L. Clapp Novelty Company, joined by his two sons Gerald and Raymond. Also, Toy Town Toy Crafters by G. Leslie Morris made toys at 52 Railroad Street. And toy manufacturing was continued by Ray Plastic at the former White Brothers Mill. Armand and Raymond Leclerc brought their toy manufacturing from Leominster to Spring Village in 1960. They adapted a line of plastic toys and were pioneers in manufacturing plastic street hockey equipment under the name Milik, owned by Ricky LaPeria and still in operation today at a new location. Lois Stevenson Greenwood notes in her book Winchendon Years that in 1925 a Boston Post writer named Henry Gillen took notice of a sign that was placed by the boosters on the main highway that lured him in when he was looking for the best New England town to live in. The sign read, "Winchendon, the best town in Massachusetts." The townfolk proudly stated it, and they also stated that it was not only the best town to live in, but likewise the happiest. The Boston Post writer described the town as Toy Town, where it's Christmas all the time. After Morton's death in 1917, his son ran the business until retirement in 1931. The firm merged then with Mason Manufacturing Company of South Paris, Maine, not to be confused with Mason and Parker Manufacturing Company of Winchendon. What some don't know is that Morton.E.Converse was elected to state senate in the early 1890s. First the lower branch, then the higher branch of the legislature. He was chairman of several committees, including the House Committee on Banks and Banking. He authored a bill to save trees on the public highways. He was also president of the local improvement associations and director of Winchendon Light and Power. He also introduced a system of water supply to the town. Converse was a 32nd degree Mason, a mystic Shriner, Odd Fellow, and member of the local tribe of Red Men. There was even an informative children's book written about him by a local writer, Deborah Hearn Giordano. Converse built a beautiful home along the old traveler's route, an area that now discreetly holds memories of a bygone era. Across from the forefathers of Winchendon's original homes and the current home of the Historical Society, one would never imagine there was a home perched upon the slopes of Tannery Hill. The multi-level home along the banks of the Millers River held a ballroom, bowling alley, and conservatory. The Millers River was one of the town's greatest natural gifts, and through the generations it powered many factories. But here it winded peacefully through the gardens with a small bridge for passing. The house contained relics Converse collected from his world travels to Europe, the Holy Land, the Far East, Egypt, and beyond. The black and white photos of the day don't depict its bright red color, and the cupola was later moved to a home nearby the Converse factory. In 1912, Converse and his son Atherton introduced to the town a landmark that would be visited by people from all over the world for generations to come. Originally known as the Toy Town Tavern and now the Winchendon School, the resort was enjoyed by famous people including Thomas Edison, the Kennedys, and many more. Morton.E.Converse died in 1917, and he is buried between his first wife Harriet Atherton from Lowell, who he married in 1869 when he was 32. Harriet is the mother of their two children, Grace Atherton and Atherton Darling. Harriet died at age 45 in 1886, and later Morton married his second wife, Bertha Evangeline Porter. Converse outlined a 100-year fund, a visionary to be able to see that far into the future and what it could bring to the town. Morton.E.Converse envisioned how a minimum investment at the time could be invested for 100 years. The first 100 years of the fund matured in 2017 for a hefty amount, and the principal will be reinvested. He was a visionary to see ahead of time how he could help the town for generations to come. The visionary Morton Ebenezer Converse was a man of generosity who left a story to tell well beyond his years. You never know what you'll find on a magical history tour.